There is a moment in every civilization when reality begins to fracture, but no one names it. The streets still echo with routine, markets still open at dawn, and voices still carry the illusion of permanence. Yet something invisible shifts beneath it all. Not an explosion, not a sudden collapse, but a quiet distortion in how people perceive the world around them. Because the end of an era does not arrive as a storm, it begins as a feeling, a subtle unease, a question no one dares to articulate. And by the time that feeling becomes undeniable, the foundations are already compromised beyond repair. Long before systems fail, the human mind begins to adapt in ways that conceal the truth. People rationalize inconsistencies. They normalize what once felt unthinkable. Daily life continues, wrapped in habits that feel safe, even as those habits lose their connection to stability. Conversations grow cautious, certainties become fragile. But the collective psyche resists disruption, because to admit that an era is ending is to confront the collapse of identity itself. And so societies delay recognition, choosing familiarity over clarity, even when that familiarity is built on something that is quietly unraveling. In the final years before collapse, life often appears deceptively normal. Families gather, institutions function, and routines provide a sense of order. But beneath that surface, cracks begin to spread. Trust erodes slowly, almost imperceptibly. Systems that once operated seamlessly begin to falter in subtle ways. Delays become common. Decisions grow inconsistent, and yet most people continue forward, not because they believe everything is stable, but because the alternative is too uncertain to face. The mind clings to continuity, even when continuity is no longer real. The first warning signs are rarely dramatic. They emerge as contradictions, promises that are no longer fulfilled, leaders who speak with confidence but act with hesitation, data that no longer aligns with lived experience. These inconsistencies create cognitive dissonance, a tension between what people are told and what they observe. But instead of confronting this tension, societies often adapt by lowering expectations. What once would have caused alarm is reinterpreted as temporary, because acknowledging the pattern would mean recognizing that the system itself is no longer reliable. As instability grows, a subtle shift occurs in behavior. People begin to prioritize short-term survival over long-term planning. Trust in institutions gives way to personal strategies. Networks shrink. Cooperation weakens. Not out of malice but out of necessity, because when systems lose predictability, individuals retreat into what they can control. This fragmentation does not appear immediately dangerous. In fact, it often feels like resilience. But over time it erodes the very structures that hold society together, accelerating the process that no one fully understands yet. At the same time, narratives begin to fracture. Competing explanations emerge, each offering a version of reality that feels more manageable than the truth. Some deny the existence of any crisis, others exaggerate it beyond recognition. Information becomes less about clarity and more about comfort. And in that environment, truth loses its stabilizing function, because when people can no longer agree on what is real, coordinated action becomes impossible. The system does not collapse from a single failure, it collapses from the inability to respond collectively. Decisions made during this phase often determine the speed of the decline. Leaders face pressures that demand immediate solutions, but the problems they confront are systemic, deeply rooted, and resistant to quick fixes. In an attempt to restore stability, they implement measures that provide temporary relief, but deepen long-term vulnerability. Each decision narrows the range of possible outcomes. Each delay reduces the chance of recovery. And still, the illusion of control persists, even as the system moves closer to a point of no return. Then comes the moment when failure becomes visible, not everywhere at once, but in specific points where pressure can no longer be contained. A disruption in supply, a breakdown in communication, a sudden loss of confidence. These events are often interpreted as isolated incidents, but they are not. They are symptoms of a structure that has lost its coherence. And by the time these signs become impossible to ignore, the underlying processes have already advanced too far to reverse. The psychological impact is immediate and profound. Fear replaces uncertainty. People who once trusted the system now question everything. Rumors spread faster than facts. Social cohesion begins to dissolve, not through conflict alone, but through the absence of shared understanding. Because when reality itself feels unstable, Individuals struggle to align their actions with others. And in that fragmentation, the collapse accelerates, feeding on the very confusion it creates. As the system continues to deteriorate, daily life transforms. What was once predictable becomes volatile. Access to resources fluctuates. Social roles shift. Institutions that once provided structure lose their authority. And in this environment, human behavior adapts rapidly. Some seek control through rigid order. Others abandon structure entirely. But beneath these responses lies the same realization, unspoken but deeply felt. The world as it was is no longer accessible. In the aftermath, the narrative often simplifies the collapse into a series of events, a crisis, a decision, a failure. But this perspective misses the deeper truth. The end of an era is not defined by what happens at the surface. It is defined by the psychological processes that unfold beneath it. The gradual erosion of trust, the normalization of instability, the inability to perceive change until it becomes irreversible. These are the forces that shape collapse long before it becomes visible. History remembers the outcomes, the fall of systems, the transformation of societies, the emergence of new structures. But what remains less visible is the experience of those who lived through the transition. The uncertainty, the adaptation, the quiet realization that something fundamental had changed. Because for those inside the moment, there is no clear beginning or end, only a gradual shift from one reality to another, often recognized only in hindsight, and in that reflection lies the most unsettling truth of all. The psychology of collapse is not confined to the past. It is a pattern embedded in how humans respond to complexity, uncertainty, and change. The same mechanisms that once delayed recognition continue to operate in every system. The same resistance to disruption, the same preference for familiarity, the same gradual normalization of instability. Because the end of an era is not just a historical event, it is a human process, and it begins long before anyone is willing to see it.